views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. It's September 26th, and this is Calgary Now. The Calgary Tower, the Saddle Dome, and snow-capped mountains have long dominated Calgary's skyline. And while those iconic buildings and natural landscape will always be a part of Calgary's identity, new structures are turning heads both within the city and from afar. The Peace Bridge, the source of much criticism as it was being built, is now embraced by the thousands who cross and photograph it every day. The Bow Building can be seen from every direction coming into the core, signaling the city's wealth and innovation. And on the horizon, the National Music Centre of Canada and TELUS Sky are keeping the buzz about Calgary going. But what about our heritage? As the new buildings go up, older ones are sitting empty or being torn down to make way. Is it a matter of sustainability, or is our young city too quick to build new and forget about the past? Preserve or modernize? It's never an easy decision when money, a thirst for growth, and historical significance are thrown into the mix. On one hand, the adage, out with the old and in with the new, signifies a passion to embrace the future and embark on a fresh path to new opportunities. On the other hand, the axiom, don't forget where you came from, reminds us that we're hard-pressed to maintain our true identity if we don't appreciate our past. Our city values both growth and its pioneer past, and yet as we flourish, our early 20th century structures could see themselves raised, to be succeeded by newer, shinier modern buildings. Is this a bad thing? Is there a happy medium somewhere? And if so, what needs to be done to ensure we continue to build thoughtful and innovative structures while respecting our history? My guests and I are discussing just that tonight. Feel free to share your opinions or questions with us via Twitter at Calgary Now Show. To get the ball rolling, let's check in with the Rant Pack.
So recently I attended a meeting, an architecture meeting in Calgary, and I was very saddened to find out that two of Calgary's most iconic buildings, the Board of Education building and the one right behind it, which are in the brutalist style, which is a very iconic style. Those buildings have been sold to a private owner and are slated to be torn down, and that there was no public input on those buildings being torn down. I find that really distressing that Calgarians are willing to ignore their icons being removed.
Hey Calgary, thanks for joining us. Joining me tonight on the show is Chris Edwards from the Calgary Heritage Initiative Society, Clint Robertson, Heritage Planner at the City of Calgary, and Mike Brown from the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So guys, briefly tell us about yourself. I'll start with you, Clint.
I'm a Heritage Planner with City Planning at the City of Calgary. I've been with the department for about 5 or 6 years, and as my title indicates, I work to preserve Calgary's heritage.
Which is probably a pretty big job, I would think.
Yes.
Keeps you busy.
Yes.
How about yourself, Chris?
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and vice president, or one of the co-founders and vice president of the Calgary Heritage Initiative Society. I've lived in Calgary for about 23 years, but it wasn't until about 2005 that I started to notice some of the heritage buildings, not only that we had, but that we had lost, and then joined up with some like-minded people to create a nonprofit volunteer society.
Cool. Perfect guess. Great. Mike, how about yourself?
Michael Brown. I'm with the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. We're the developer of East Village. Prior to that, I actually worked on the Bow Building, one of those new buildings. And
beautiful structure.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous structure. And we work on everything from new buildings to activating some of Calgary's heritage buildings.
Awesome. Good panel, guys. So that's what we're talking. So to start it off then, just how important to the culture of our city do we think some of these old structures are? I mean, what do they give us?
Well, I mean, I would say that the key with old structures is, you can look at photos and you can see, what used to be here, you can see where we've come from, but unless they exist, and particularly if they exist where they were built, the fact that you can go down and touch them and see the building in front of you that you saw in this photo where maybe some history was happening really kind of grounds the city, I believe.
It's shown, over really at the end of the day as a developer, which is the business we're in, we've figured out, I guess, as the development community, that what people are looking for is a unique feel, and I think your heritage buildings, you have that automatically. What we've seen in terms of in East Village is people want to come down and they want to see the new, but they want to see the old. They don't want to see all the same. They
Sure.
want to see some diversity in product. And we're fortunate in East Village, we have 3 historical buildings. And, we always wish we had more because it gives that difference and it gives that sense of this is the East Village. It's not anywhere. It's got specific feel to it.
Yeah, very unique. And I think it probably, as a whole, our city, you'll find pockets where people appreciate just that.
Yeah.
I imagine you probably agree, Clint.
Yeah. But I just wanted to echo the other 2 guests, the value of heritage. I mean, if you look at where people travel on a holiday from Calgary, people travel to cities with heritage. People travel to New York, to New Orleans, to Miami Beach, cities with heritage. So I think that sort of speaks for the value of heritage.
Because we are a relatively young city, are we not? I mean, compared to some of these other towns you mentioned, I mean, we're just,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're a young city, but you have to, the interesting thing of our heritage is they all speak to a point in time in our history.
That's right.
There's many examples of everybody. The most recent one is you think about the St. Louis and people connect it to Ralph Klein. You think of the Hudson's Bay, what that meant to Calgary when the Hudson's Bay building was built. You think of the Simmons Mattress Factory, when it came on stream, the fact that you had a mattress factory, those were all significant points in our history. And it's part of who we are, so you need to recognize it.
Absolutely. You mentioned the Hudson's Bay building, a building that was built essentially to celebrate Calgary's population growth and our I guess our successes as a city. That building, though, is that an untouchable building? I mean, it's 100 years old this year. I mean, it's prime real estate. I mean, I imagine there's been a lot of money thrown at that site. Is it an untouchable structure? Is it going to be there forever, do we think?
I would like to think it's going to be there. I'm happy to hear that the Bay has just announced that they're going to put a lot of money into the building with a new restaurant and a big event space on the 6th floor. So I think that that's a good sign. And I think that building is very near and dear to Calgarians' hearts. So I find it hard to imagine the building going anywhere. But in actual fact, technically, the building is not legally protected. The building could be demolished, actually.
Oh, so it's not recognized as a heritage building?
It's formally acknowledged to be a heritage building. It's on the city's inventory. But a lot of our very well-loved buildings are not legally protected.
It's interesting.
Absolutely. And one thing I would say is that when it comes to the Bay, it's easy to get a large swath of the populace to appreciate it, and it's maybe an easier one to preserve. It's the ones that maybe are a little more obscure or maybe aren't rock stars as far as looks, but maybe has a really important history behind them. They become a little bit more difficult. And I also just want to mention, we are a young city, and people talk about, Calgary has no history. We go to Europe, and these buildings are 500 years old or 1,000 years old. Yeah. But they're 500 or 1,000 years old because they weren't torn down.
That's
they were
exactly.
100
Well, that was
years
the
old.
point I was trying to make. That's right. That's
right.
If you tear
down your 100-year-old buildings, you have no 200-year-old buildings.
So what's more on your radar then? Is it the old red brick buildings? You mentioned, the smaller kind of obscure structures.
Well, I mean that's part of it, but I mean the guest who was talking about the brutalist buildings, those are other ones that we're interested in. The Calgary Board of Education, of course, the old Catholic school board building across the street as well, which is sort of this brutalist castle-looking building. And those are really interesting, and they're really out there. A lot of people think they're a little bit too in your face, and they don't like them. But there's so few of those in Calgary. I think it's very important to at least keep some remnants of every style.
You kind of have to
perhaps as a warning to never build it again. But
maybe, but it also does represent that point in time, which again,
Absolutely.
The adage, you got to kind of remember where you come from.
Exactly.
Well, one of the challenges you have with some of the historical buildings is they've had different iterations, and so it's getting back to as close to those original days as you can. We've worked with a number of historical buildings, and you're pulling back layers of some of it's history, but some of it's pretty nasty history, and it's getting back to those original times. And I think one of the things we've learned as a developer, and I definitely know working with guys like these guys, is how do you achieve that balance? How do you still get it to the point where financially you can accomplish it, but to get it as close as you can to what it was? Because there is the person, and I agree with you guys wholeheartedly, when a person comes down, they want to experience that history. And they don't want to see, the nasty term you often think is sodomy, where you just basically keep the outside and you lose the inside. The inside's just as important as the outside.
Right.
Yeah,
and you get some consistency to that. But it's that balancing act. I really wish in Canada we could get our heads around it a bit more. In other parts of the U.S., and we talked about it earlier, you, as a developer, there's many tools you can pull on to activate that building. In Canada, there is very little tools that you can use.
So Shifting gears just a little bit here, what then is the criteria to be, you say, acknowledged as a heritage structure, but to be recognized where this building is not going anywhere, it's protected? What criteria does a structure need to meet in order to obtain that?
Well, the City of Calgary has an inventory, and placement on the inventory is just a formal acknowledgement that a site has heritage value. To protect and regulate a building, the building must be protected by a city bylaw or by the province. And protecting a building in the Alberta context is a little bit more difficult than protecting buildings and districts in other provinces and states in North America. Without getting too far into it, Alberta is probably a unique jurisdiction in the North American context. If we want to legally protect a building or legally protect a district, we have to provide compensation to those owners for any economic loss in value. You could see that could become very expensive. Other municipalities across North America, of course there's political implications and considerations, but they can, council in other places can create a district without providing that compensation. Council can legally protect and regulate a building without providing that compensation. Alberta is a unique jurisdiction in North America, and we work in a unique context here.
And as Clint was saying, one thing that maybe wasn't explicit is that because of the need to give compensation for loss of economic value, and really who knows what that might mean. That might be more than simply the land
that sounds
value.
Awful vague, actually.
Generally, there won't be any protection done without the consent of the owner.
So is that the culture of our city? I mean, we are definitely a business-oriented city, and that's fair. I mean, we do want to grow, but you mentioned that it's unique to, our province as well. Right. Do we think that's because of our drive as Calgarians to expand that business community and maybe lead some of these structures the wayward?
It's a tough argument because you can argue both ways. There's the guy that bought that piece of land,
who's got every right to do it.
It's not the right side. Forget about the right thing. He bought it with the idea of achieving a certain value. So it's a bit of a balance. What I guess I'd argue for is give some tools to them so that you can actually achieve that value, but still keep the building. That's one of the. We were talking earlier. I worked in Calgary, obviously a developer. I've worked with a developer that was in Dallas. In Dallas, your ability to pull on tools, incentives, whether it credits, gets you to the point where it's actually it's cost beneficial to keep the building, not cost prohibitive to keep the building. And so you need to shift the context a little bit and get people to think about it different. Yeah. The other side is, at that point in time, it's not about whether there's a bylaw. It's an economic opportunity. You suddenly shift and say, I want to keep this building because you know what? I can make this project far more viable with the building than without. Right now, it's all based on, okay, is there a bylaw in place? What does the bylaw protect? That's one of the scariest things you get into. You may be an element of the building that's actually would be really interesting, but it's not protected. You really want to see it as an opportunity, not as a challenge.
We've got to change our whole mentality then, it sounds like, from your perspective.
Very much.
Yeah, and certainly it's not just a sticks approach, it's got to be a carrot and stick approach. And unfortunately, some of the incentives that Michael talked about, like the tax credit program in the United States, that comes from a federal level. So the donation of easements in the United States, that's got to be recognized by the Internal Revenue Service or our equivalent. And we just don't have those very, very, very important tools in our toolbox at this moment. That is why the rubber has hit the road in the United States in great measure.
We're going to take a quick break, folks, and hear from the rant back. We'll continue the discussion right after this. Stay with us.
I think Calgary has some great architecture, especially around the donut around downtown. I went to school in Western Canada. I guess that's kind of uptown. The building was 100 years old. It was fantastic, a functional building, and it was just really cool. They used to have tours of the tunnels that they have underneath, and it was awesome. Currently, I attend Royal Roads University in Victoria. That's also a really, really nice architectural building. But at the same time, we have to keep it functional. We can't cry every single time an old building gets destroyed. Old becomes new, new becomes old. We just got to keep it moving at times.
Architecture in Calgary has come a long way in the past 20 or 30 years, I'd say. We did have sort of In the beginning, in the 1920s and 30s, when there was money here from the farming, there was something to be said for the architecture back then that has lasted and sustained to today. I do think we need to save some of that architecture in making way for the new. I don't believe in knocking down a lot of the old sandstone buildings to make way for new glass skyscrapers. Some of them do look good, but it's all personal opinion when it comes to architecture anyways. So really, it's 50 one, 50 the other.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion. So guys, how do some of these old structures influence the new buildings, the new structures that we see being erected, built in our city?
Well, in a big way, simpler when you're building is, and we've found that in what we're doing, and I think the city of Calgary is very supportive, is make sure there's a contrast. If you're going to have an historical building, let's not duplicate it. Let's make sure it really stands out and it pops. Every building has its time, and you talked about, whether it's the CBE building or others in terms of the brutalist period, it has its time. And I think with some of the newer buildings, the Bow building at some point in time hopefully will be historical in nature. It won't be in our lifetime, but it'll be in somebody else's lifetime. And it'll speak to a point in time. So it's really, you want that contrast. You don't want it all to look the same.
That is the character of the city. Doesn't that add to the character? I think it's got to be in a nutshell.
It is, and there's always a debate, I think, amongst sort of the heritage community about historicist architecture. So whether you should be creating new buildings that reference or try to duplicate the older ones. I mean, my personal preference would be not to. I'd rather see that someone 100 years from now sees a building that, wow, that is what the architecture that existed 100 years ago, and oh wow, that's like this bad copy of that other one beside it that's 200 years old. So I think it's definitely should be going for the modern. And I think if you have a modern building, say right next to a heritage building, which some people will be against, I think the contrast makes them both pop. So
I would definitely
go that route.
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of these comments. I think we've done a fairly good job in Calgary as of late, striking that balance. If you take the new Arriva Tower in the Victoria Park area, which is next to a sandstone school and next to a bungalow school, we came up with a very creative way to retain those heritage buildings whilst placing on the site two very, very ultra-modern towers. And I think most people would agree that the development has been very successful. I'd also have to agree with Chris. The ethos in our office is you should work like heck and fight like heck to preserve what we've got. And for new architecture, it should be the best of its type so that someday it could become heritage.
Yeah, the best of its type. That's important.
Yeah.
You have to, and I agree wholeheartedly. The one thing that when you think about heritage, though, sometimes periods of time in Calgary's history, it wasn't as affluent a community as it is now. So the building from an architectural might not be an architectural marvel, but some really interesting things could have taken place in those spaces. And I think that's one of the things, when I was thinking about this topic, we always get excited about architecture and it's about top. There's some pretty lousy spaces that have some pretty amazing things that take place in them. Like I look at it's like the Legion downtown, #1 Legion. It's not a great building in some people's minds, but it's got a really neat history, and I wouldn't want to lose that just because it doesn't have all those architectural.
Well, how do you draw the line, though? I mean, where do you draw the line between structures that sure they've got a lot of history to them? It's in, like you mentioned, an area that may be a lot more affluent now than it was during the time period it was built. When does it become a sore thumb?
Well, I think in Calgary we drew the line with the amount of buildings that we actually demolished. We're left with what we have, and we need to try and keep them as much as we can.
So everything that exists now, are you all proponents of keeping exactly what's there the way it is?
I think as much as you can.
Yeah.
I think as much as reasonably possible. I think you got to look at it first and see if you can keep it. We don't have, and we've talked about this, we're not like Toronto, we're not like others where you have all that history. So what we have to cherish as much as we can.
Yeah, and let it become even deeper history.
Yeah, and as Clint was talking about the inventory, buildings that are put on the inventory have gone through the rigorous process to determine, is this something that has heritage, something with historic value, or simply an old building. So you don't have to worry about wanting to keep everything just because it's old, because it's already been vetted. So if it's on the inventory.
In East Village, over where we're building St. Patrick's Bridge, there used to be a turntable, and it's buried now. And I think oftentimes we think about keeping it and protecting it. You can always do things, and we're looking at it and saying, okay, what can we do from a design point of view in that area that actually speaks to the fact that there was a turntable there?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of you can keep it, but it's the conversation that'll come as a
Yeah,
result of
absolutely.
it.
It's like
Where
a little bit of a history lesson.
Yeah, and you
Exactly,
remember,
yeah.
and you'll have a little kid that'll go by and say, well, what's this, mom and dad? Well, that was a turntable. Why is there a turntable in the middle of this park? And you get into, that's
Cool.
a very good
Yeah,
conversation.
I like that. Again, to the character of our city.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that sort of, turns around the idea that, Calgary has no history, is when you bring up, a lot of it, Calgary does have a lot of history, just maybe it's not in your face as much as in other cities. And I think working on projects like that are what can help change that.
So we talked earlier briefly about the Bow building. I think we're all in agreement it's a beautiful structure.
Yep.
The
Very
Peace
cool.
Bridge was a hot point of contention. I think a lot of it had to do with politics more than anything.
Yes.
Personally, after the storm has settled, I like the bridge. I think it's nice. I've utilized it a few times. Those structures, now, do they bring more structures, or is that kind of putting us on the map to innovate the way that we have? I mean, let's be honest, Calgary Tower, decent structure, probably had its time. Bow building, I think, maybe changes the game. Are we going to see more? How about this? Does it help the business of our city? Bring in more of these, well, we've got the TELUS Sky Tower, for example, coming.
Well, it changes
How does it lend itself? Yeah.
Well, it lends itself. The Bow, an example, and I think the Peace Bridge, and there's others examples. I think there's many. I think of examples of great architecture has showed up in the last 10 years in Calgary. It changed it raised the bar. It changed the expectation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things it did, from a Calgary point of view, is it demonstrated that you can actually do really interesting architecturally worthy projects that are cost responsible. It used to be a point in time in Calgary where it was, if you're going to do something like, oh, that's just crazy, that's going to be a ludicrous amount of money.
Yeah.
I know the Peace Bridge really got picked on for the price point,
Sure
but it
did.
really wasn't that high a price point for what the project was. We're building a bridge very similar in East Village in terms of St. Patrick's. The price point's pretty consistent. That's what those bridges cost. But it's an interesting project, and it brings people to look at it.
Yeah, one thing I think is kind of cool is that, I don't want to call it one-upmanship, but I think once you start, you get this sort of situation where someone builds a really amazing building, and then someone wants the next one to look a little nicer, and then you start getting this constant
momentum.
I mean, even on my street, for example, a house that was built 8 years ago looks terrible compared to one that was built last year, and the difference in the architectural quality is amazing, and I think this is happening citywide.
Are we going to run into just to play devil's advocate, is there potential to run into a scenario where, look, for example, the National Music Centre of Canada. I don't know if you've seen the drawings. It looks like out there. It's cool. It's definitely innovative. It's definitely a fresh look. I don't know if everybody would agree with that, but be that as it may, are we at risk, I guess, of coming to a point where it's more style and the art side of things than actual substance of the structures? Is there potential for that?
Well, that happened, right? I mean, you look at things from the Victorian era, and then you had things from the 60s where or the 50s where it just went completely plain because people were sick of or the ornamentation. So these things kind of come and go in cycles, and I think that'll just continue.
I had the opportunity to look at some projects in the Middle East, and I would say over there it's ego and art driven, and it's not rationalized. I think most of our projects, you talk about the Bow Tower, that's owned by a pension group. You talk about the TELUS Sky Tower, it's going to be owned by people that have to generate a return. They don't look at those buildings architecturally. They look at it, what's the return on paper? And I think that's the part that keeps it reasonable. What technologies, though, has shown us is that you can do interesting buildings like the Bow, financially responsible, and the thinking, it's come so much farther than it was. I think the difference in Calgary, though, now that we've over that 1 million mark, is our ability to attract talent that can look at these buildings and think outside the box.
Absolutely.
It's completely different.
Well, Clint, would there ever be a time the city would review us? I mean, how does that process work, I suppose? Where a structure is proposed, this is what we want to build, maybe it's outlandish, maybe it's ridiculous, it just doesn't fit. For whatever reason, it's not going to work out in the eyes of the city. Now, does the city have the power to kibosh that within the core?
If it's not going to work out in
Well,
terms
just design-wise, if it's just considered a complete eyesore, for example.
No, it would be very difficult, actually. There are no regulated design guidelines in the center city. We do have design guidelines, but
He holds the money, he holds the power,
they're not
essentially.
regulations.
It's on the market.
We're gonna, guys, sorry to cut you off. We're gonna jump for a quick break and hear from Justine and Derek from the Rant Pack.
I think it's really disappointing to see the historic buildings kind of go and the new skyscrapers and the new innovative designs kind of take their place. But I think that it also makes sense. Calgary is a booming city. You know, we're a very business-oriented city, so I think that although I'm definitely on the side of kind of the arts and preserving the history and culture of Calgary, it makes sense to me why we're investing money in kind of these big, notable buildings that are going to start to put Calgary on the map.
Architecture is not just a matter of building buildings, it's a matter of building a city and building space for the people within that city. It's great that Calgary has embraced new architecture. It's important that Calgary embraces old architecture as well. Preserving our heritage buildings, important, but embracing the new architecture, even more important. That's what puts us going forward, a city that people want to be in.
So it sounds like Derek shares, essentially our opinion that we have to embrace, the new, the modern. Now, is there any circumstance, though, that embracing these new modern structures will, come at the cost of what we still have left, which I know isn't a lot of structures, but let's be honest, they're not all going to stay, guys.
Absolutely.
What are the driving factors? I mean, is it simply economics? Is it citizens wanting, just a different, more modern structures in place of old structures? I mean, who really holds the power as far as those structures are concerned?
I think it's a matter of economics. If you go to a city like Winnipeg, which has a wealth of heritage buildings, it's not really because people in Winnipeg care more about heritage than people in Calgary, or
I agree.
It's about economics. It's reflective of the fact that Calgary's had a very strong economy and Winnipeg's had a very weak economy for many years, and so largely it boils down to economics.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the money to basically constantly wipe the slate clean and build something new, you're going to be left with less historic buildings than maybe of a less vibrant economy where reuse is actually the more economically smart way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, what power do citizens have to ensure that these things don't happen? Is there much that Joe Q taxpayer can do?
I think they do, because and actually that is where the power is, because an organization like ours, we'll talk to the alderman, we'll talk to whoever, and we're expected to. That's kind of our job.
Yeah.
Whereas the key is to get the citizens, i.e. the voters, to be talking to the alderman and to be talking to the mayor. And we've had situations where a building was threatened, and we put out a Facebook sort of
social
campaign,
media, great tool for anything.
And one of the aldermen was I feel like was almost getting tired of how many emails he was getting because of it, and things started to happen. And so that's really is where the power is the citizens of the city to basically make their voice heard, and it's up to us to convince them or to educate them on what the value of these buildings are.
But I do think the consumer, and the consumer ultimately drives everything, whether it's a taxpayer or consumer, what do you call them? You see the value in these buildings, and for us, it'd be great to be able to say, we have these historical buildings, we're keeping them because we're good people and it's the goodness of our heart. We're actually doing it because we know it's a great part of our community, and we know it attracts the buyer to the other buildings we're building. So be thankful. That's always a dynamic that's at play. People want to have diversity. It's not just about old and new. It's about diversity. They want to see a little bit of everything.
And that's culture right there. That's what our city is in a nutshell. Guys, we're out of time. Thanks a lot for being here.
Good.
Thanks for having us.
Folks, thanks very much for joining us tonight. We will be back next week, 7 p.m. right here on Shaw TV. We're talking about, what are we talking about next week? Oh yes, that's right. We're talking about distracted drivers. They're still out there. Join us then. Take care.